Dust clung to the air like sorrow on the land. Texas hadn't seen rain in over a month, and the July sun scorched everything it touched. Cattle lay in the shade of the few remaining mesquites, panting. Even the wind seemed to move slower, heavy. With heat at the edge of Riverbend Ranch, Clayton Reese, a quiet widowed rancher in his early 40s, rode his horse along the south fence line. He was checking for breaks in the wire. The last storm had knocked down some posts near the dry creek bed. Clayton had been alone for too long now, speaking more to his cattle and the wind than to people. The land had become both his sanctuary and his prison. As he approached the narrow ravine, something caught his eye. A motionless figure lying near a cluster of rocks. Clayton dismounted slowly, keeping his hand near his revolver. Rattlers weren't the only danger out here. He stepped closer and saw what looked like a man, native, judging by the dark braids and fringed clothing. His shirt was torn, stained with blood around the ribs. One leg looked badly broken. Flies buzzed around the wound. The man's face was cracked with dryness, his lips blistered. Clayton crouched beside him, cautious but concerned. The man stirred. Weakly, his cracked eyes fluttering open for a second, barely registering his presence. He tried to speak, but only coughed. "Easy now," Clayton muttered, glancing around. "You ain't gonna die out here if I can help it." From his saddlebag, he pulled a worn canteen, almost all he had left. He lifted the man's head gently and poured a little water into his mouth. The man coughed, but then swallowed. "Names, Clayton," he said softly. "You just rest." He fashioned a crude splint from a branch and a rag, then heaved the injured man onto his horse, leading it back toward the homestead. Clayton knew what the town would say if they saw this. A white rancher helping a wounded native. Folks would whisper, even threaten. But Clayton didn't much care. He'd buried his wife 3 years ago under the big cottonwood by the river, and since then, most folks had given him a wide berth anyway. Back at the ranch, he laid the man on a cot in the barn's loft, away from prying eyes. He boiled water, cleaned the wound as best he could, and left some bread and jerky by his side. All evening, Clayton worked the ranch with one eye on the barn, and at night, when coyotes howled, in the distance, he sat near the loft, keeping watch with his rifle nearby. The man hadn't spoken a word, but his breathing had steadied. Whatever had happened to him, Clayton knew one thing. He hadn't just fallen. Someone had done this. Shot, maybe, beaten, left to die. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise behind the hills, Clayton stepped onto his porch with a cup of bitter coffee, and that's when he saw it dot far across the dusty plain. Where the hills met the horizon, a line of riders was forming, dozens, then more, silhouetted against the gold-pink dawn. They moved like a wave, silent, powerful, unstoppable. Horsemen. Dozens at first, then over 100. Their spears and rifles shimmered in the morning light. Feathered headdresses, war paint, banners. Women rode behind, some with children. Elders rode in solemn lines. Clayton stood frozen, his cup dropping from his hand and shattering on the porch. They were riding straight for him. Clayton Reese stood frozen on his porch, the morning sun rising behind his shoulders, casting his long shadow across the cracked yard. His breath caught in his chest. Across the dry plain, hundreds of riders moved in silence, native warriors, elders, women, and even children, riding toward him like a tide that would not stop. Banners fluttered in the breeze. Dust rose under hooves. Spears gleamed. There was no music, no yelling, no war cries, only that eerie silence. Clayton's hand twitched toward the rifle by the door, but he didn't pick it up. Instead, he stepped off the porch and walked out into the yard, eyes fixed on the riders approaching like ghosts from another world. By the time they reached the edge of his property, the riders fanned out in a wide arc, not a siege, but a formation. At the center of it all rode 3 figures, older men with long braids, painted faces, and eyes that seemed to hold centuries. One of them dismounted. He was tall, weathered, wrapped in a faded buffalo robe. His necklace of beads and carved bone clacked softly as he walked. He stopped just a few feet from Clayton and looked him straight in the eye. Clayton didn't flinch. The old man lifted his hand, not in threat, but in a gesture of peace. "You gave water to my grandson," he said in clear, measured English. Clayton blinked. He was dying. He replied simply, "Couldn't just leave him." Behind the old man, murmurs passed through the crowd. More riders dismounted. Some of the women looked at Clayton with curiosity, others with caution. A few boys hopped down and walked toward the barn, where Clayton had left the wounded man resting. The old man nodded slowly. He was ambushed by bounty hunters, thought. He'd escaped. They left him bleeding in the sun. He looked out over the land. But your ranch was the last place he crawled toward. Clayton didn't say anything. What could he say? The old man reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. He handed it to Clayton. Clayton opened it carefully. Inside was a single eagle feather, bound with red thread and beads, along with a stone carved into the shape of a bison. "This is a gift," the elder said, "a sign of respect. You saved blood of our blood, and now the tribes come to thank you." Clayton looked at the gift, then back at the sea of riders. Didn't expect this. He muttered, "You treated our kin as your own," the old man said, stepping forward. "That does not go unanswered." Just then, a younger man rushed out of the barn. It was the same wounded warrior, limping but upright, helped by 2 others. He looked at Clayton with a steadier gaze than yesterday. "You gave me water when I had nothing," he said hoarsely. "You gave me breath." Clayton nodded. "Guess you got plenty of folks worried about you." The warrior smiled faintly. "More than I thought." What happened next nearly knocked Clayton off his boots. One by one, riders began dismounting and placing small bundles, offerings, and gifts at the foot of his porch: woven blankets, pelts, carved figures, jerky, beads, even a rifle with ornate markings. Children helped stack the items. Women offered baskets of dried berries. An elder woman approached with a soft leather pouch and gently tied it to his fence post. She didn't speak, but her eyes shimmered with gratitude. The air buzzed with reverence. Clayton didn't know what to do. He'd only given water. He hadn't asked for anything. "You showed heart," the elder said behind him. "In a time when many forget what it means to be human." Clayton looked out at the vast crowd. "They're all from one tribe." The old man shook his head. "No, 5. Clayton's jaw tightened. 5 tribes, all for one man, all for one kindness. The elder corrected. The dust hadn't even settled at Riverbend Ranch before word reached town. By the time Clayton Reese rode into Dry Creek, a modest settlement with a saloon, a church, and more gossip than law, whispers had turned into full-blown stories. Folks leaned out of windows. Old men put down their dominoes. A group of children stopped mid-chase to gawk at him. Clayton tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside for feed and nails. The bell above the door jingled, and every head inside turned. Old Bo Parsons, the storekeeper, was already shaking his head. "Heard you had a congregation out at your place," he said, not looking up as he weighed a bag of oats. Clayton said nothing, just placed a coil of fencing on the counter. 5 tribes. Bo said louder now. "That what I heard." A weary man in the corner stood up from the barrels. "Must be some mistake," he said with a sneer. "Them tribes ain't set foot together in years, unless there's blood to spill." Clayton calmly placed a tin of nails next to the feed. "No mistake," he said. "They came peaceful. Left gifts. The weary man barked a laugh. Gifts? You serious? You expect us to believe a man like you, a white rancher, is gettin' honored by warriors like it's some tribal ceremony? Bo cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension. Now hold on, Travis. But Travis wasn't done. You bringing Indians that close to town, Reese, you're stirring up trouble that don't need stirring. We already got cattle missing and fences cut. Don't want anyone thinking it's got to do with your guests. Clayton's eyes were calm, but firm. Wasn't the tribes cutting those fences? You know that. You vouching for them. Now, Travis snapped. Or maybe you think you're one of them. A silence fell over the store. Even Bo paused, the scoop in his hand suspended mid-air. Clayton leaned forward, placing both hands on the counter. His voice was low but steady. I gave water to a man dying in the sun. That's all. The rest is between me, him, and the land. He dropped a few coins on the counter, gathered his supplies, and walked out without another word. Back at the ranch that evening, the gifts from the tribes still lay neatly by the porch, untouched. He hadn't dared move them yet. It felt like moving them would undo the weight they carried. But in the fading light, something else troubled him more than town gossip. A shadow moved at the tree line. He grabbed his rifle and approached cautiously. A horse had been tied just inside the trees, a sleek black gelding, well cared for. From behind a rock, a man stepped out. It was the young warrior, the one Clayton had saved. His limp was better now, but his side was still wrapped in cloth. He wore a short buckskin jacket, no war paint, just a quiet presence that seemed older than his years. I had to come back, he said. Clayton lowered the rifle. Didn't think I'd see you again. The young man looked toward the house. You didn't take the gifts, didn't seem right. I don't need thanks. The warrior stepped closer. It's not thanks. It's witness. Clayton frowned. Witness to what? That someone remembered the old ways. The man said that a man didn't turn his back when the world told him to. He paused. My name is Toma. My grandfather was the one who spoke to you. I remember, Clayton said. Toma's face darkened. There are men in town who don't like what happened. They say you betrayed your kind. Some of them. They follow bounty trails, paid to hunt natives like game. Clayton clenched his jaw. I figured trouble would come. Toma looked up at the stars. Then let me stay. Just a few nights. I'll help men fence. You helped me, now I help you. Clayton hesitated, then nodded. Barn's got room, as Toma turned to walk toward the barn. Clayton looked back at the horizon. The real storm hadn't come yet, but Heck could feel it stirring. Clayton Reese awoke to the distant sound of hooves. At first, he thought it was the cattle shifting, but then came a louder thump with splintering. He threw off his blanket, grabbed his rifle, and rushed out of the house. The eastern sky was still deep blue, with the first signs of dawn cracking through. He saw the smoke before he saw the flames. The north fence line, where his property met the dry gulch, was burning. Toma, Clayton shouted, racing for the barn. The young native warrior had already leapt from the hayloft, tying his hair back as he ran toward the horses. Together, they saddled up and galloped toward the fire. By the time they reached the blaze, 2 fence posts were already charred, and the dry grass was catching quickly. Clayton jumped down and beat the fire with his coat, while Toma kicked dirt and tore down the flaming boards. They worked in silence, moving like a team who'd done this 100 times. When the fire was out, both men were covered in ash and sweat, their lungs burning from the smoke. Clayton looked around the area and saw something sticking out of the ground, a wooden stake, with a piece of red cloth tied to it. On the cloth was a crude drawing, a noose. Toma picked it up. Jaw tight, message, he said quietly. Clayton spit. In the dirt, cowards in the night, Same kind who'd shoot a man in the back then hide behind town walls. They think this'll scare you? Toma asked. Clayton looked out across his land. I ain't afraid of fire. I'm afraid of letting men like that go unanswered. They spent the rest of the morning repairing the fence and burying the scorched posts. Cattle were scattered farther than usual, spooked. Toma worked hard despite his injury, never complaining. By midday, the sun was brutal again. They sat under the only shade tree on the ridge, sharing water from a single canteen. You ever kill a man, Toma? Clayton asked suddenly, staring out over the parched earth. Toma didn't look at him. Yes, he said quietly. Was it justice? Toma wiped sweat from his brow. I thought so at the time, but justice fades. Regret doesn't. Clayton nodded slowly. He knew that truth too well. He'd taken a life once, during a cattle war years ago. A rustler, or maybe just a desperate man stealing beef to feed his kids. Clayton never forgot the look in the man's eyes before he went down. That night, as the moon rose over Riverbend Ranch, Clayton sat on his porch cleaning his rifle. The sky was quiet, too quiet. Until he heard the soft crunch of footsteps. Toma stepped into the lantern light, holding something wrapped in deer hide. This was left by your barn, he said. Inside the wrapping was a dead bird, a crow, with its wings broken and feathers dyed red. Clayton frowned. Another message? More than that, Toma said. It's a warning. In our traditions, a red crow means war is near. Clayton gritted his teeth. So they want to push me into something. Make me flinch. You helped me, and for that, you carry our weight now, Toma said. That comes with enemies. Clayton looked toward the dark hills. Then let 'em come. Toma sat beside him. We could ride. Head north, disappear. You'd be safe. Clayton shook his head. I've run enough in my life. This land was my wife's dream. She's buried under that cottonwood by the river. I ain't leavin' it. Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken respect. Toma finally said, then we make a stand. In the barn that night, Clayton wrapped the eagle feather he'd been given into a leather band and tied it around his hat. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was a line between two worlds, and that line was about to be tested. 3 days after the fire, Clayton re-spotted the riders. Not warriors this time, but ranch hands from Thompson's Spread, 20 miles east. Hired guns, 6 of them, all wearing gray dusters and wide hats, rifles slung lazily across their saddles. They weren't passing through. They rode with purpose, straight toward Riverbend Ranch. Clayton stood out front with Toma, both armed. The fence line had been repaired, the porch swept. The offerings from the tribes still sat undisturbed, though dust now coated the hand-woven baskets and buffalo hides. The lead rider, a big man with a snake-shaped belt buckle, pulled his horse up hard just 10 paces away. You Reese? He asked, spitting into the dirt. I am. I'm here with a message from Landon Briggs, he said. Says you've been making the wrong kind of friends. Clayton didn't blink. That right? Town's nervous. Briggs wants peace. Says maybe you ought to pack up and sell while the offer's still warm. Behind him, one of the riders laughed, clearly itching for something more than conversation. Toma stepped forward. You threatening him? The man sneered. Didn't realize you had a guard dog, Reese. Clayton stepped in front of Toma. You can ride back and tell Briggs I'm not for sale, and I'm not scared of shadows in the night. The man's eyes narrowed. You're digging yourself a deep hole. Clayton raised his rifle just enough to make the point. Then you best ride off before you fall into it. For a tense moment, no one moved. Wind rustled dry leaves in the silence. Then, reluctantly, the riders turned. Dust kicked up behind them as they galloped back toward the horizon. Toma exhaled slowly. They'll be back, I know, that night, Clayton. lit the lantern in the barn, and walked the perimeter twice. Toma stayed up sharpening a knife and checking supplies. They knew the warning shot was over. The next time, bullets would follow. But they weren't alone. Around midnight, horses approached, softly, carefully, not from the front, but the eastern ridge. Clayton leveled his rifle, but a low whistle came through the dark, a familiar one. Toma stepped outside and smiled. From the brush emerged a small group of native men and women, warriors from Toma's tribe, and two others. They rode without war paint, but carried bows, spears, and rifles passed down through generations. One of them, a weathered man with deep scars across his cheek, dismounted and approached. Toma, he said, we heard what they sent. We come to stand. Clayton stepped forward. I didn't call for help. The man looked him in the eye. No, but your kindness did. That speaks louder than a call. Within minutes, they set up camp. Silent fires, careful placement of horses, eyes watching every direction. Like smoke drifting through the hills, they arrived without sound and made the land their ally. Clayton stood at the fence line, looking out into the night. You ever wonder if this ends badly? He asked. Toma joined him. Always. But the old ones say, if you die standing for something true, you don't really die. Clayton let that sit for a while. He touched the eagle feather on his hat. Then we stand. Dawn came quietly, too quietly. Just as the sun's edge broke across the ridge, the first shot rang out. A bullet smashed into the porch post, splintering wood. Then came another from the west, then more. 6 riders again, but this time with guns drawn and fury in their eyes. Clayton dove behind the water trough. Toma rolled across the dirt and fired once, hitting a rider in the leg. From the trees, the native warriors emerged like ghosts, firing with precision, moving with purpose. Arrows and bullets filled the air. One of the attackers shouted, "It's an ambush!" Clayton spotted the leader, the man with the snake buckle, reloading behind a rock. He took careful aim and fired. The man dropped. Silence returned, broken only by the moans of the wounded. 4 of the attackers lay on the ground. The rest fled into the hills. Toma walked out slowly, lowering his rifle. Clayton stood too, chest heaving. They had defended Riverbend, but it wasn't over. By noon, the battlefield had gone quiet. Clayton Reese leaned against a porch post, now splintered from a bullet, his shirt stained with dust and sweat. Toma stood nearby, cleaning his rifle. The wounded had been tended to, the dead buried on a hill overlooking the northern fence line. No words were spoken at the graves, only silence and stone. The men who had come to scare Clayton off had fled, some limping, others leaving their horses behind. But Clayton knew the fight wasn't done. When men like Landon Briggs failed to break you with fear, they called in something worse. And just after midday, it arrived. A cloud of dust rolled from the southern road. Behind it, a deputy wagon from Dry Creek clattered up the trail, escorted by 6 mounted men in badges and stiff blue uniforms. At the center was a tall figure in a dark coat, sheriffed white America man, who wore the law like a noose. Clayton met them at the fence, hands resting calmly at his sides. Merrick pulled up, eyes sweeping across the ranch, then narrowing at the tribal warriors still watching from the tree line. "Well," he said, voice low and unimpressed, "this is a pretty picture. Just cleaning up after trespassers." Clayton replied evenly. "Funny," Merrick said. "Story I heard said you and your Injun army opened fire on hard-working cowhands." "They weren't cowhands," Clayton snapped. "They were hired guns. Came here to run me off. Left burning fences. Shot first." Merrick raised an eyebrow. "You got proof?" Clayton didn't blink. "The ground's still warm with the bodies. That proof enough?" Merrick sighed and stepped down from his horse. He nodded at one of his deputies. Who stepped forward holding a set of iron shackles? Clayton Reese. Merrick said coldly. You're under arrest, suspicion of murder, harboring fugitives, and inciting native aggression. The tribal warriors tensed. Toma stepped forward, hand on his knife. You lay a finger on him. Clayton raised a hand to stop him. Don't, he said quietly. That's what they want. Toma's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. Clayton looked Merrick in the eye. You're gonna arrest me for saving a dying man? No, Merrick said smugly. We're arresting you for what came after. He nodded again, and two deputies moved in. Clayton didn't resist. They bound his wrists in iron and led him toward the wagon dot. As he climbed inside, he turned back to Toma. Hold the land, he said. Toma nodded solemnly. We'll keep it safe. The jail cell in Dry Creek was hot and smelled of rust and rot. Clayton sat on the hard cot, wrists bruised, hat gone, but dignity intact. Across from him sat Landon Briggs, clean-shaven and smug in his leather vest. Briggs leaned forward. Could have had a nice exit, Reese. I offered to buy. You didn't. Take it. Clayton looked up slowly. And now what? You steal the land while I rot behind bars? Briggs chuckled. No, I let the law do it. Sheriff Merrick's good at making things disappear. You think the tribes will let that happen? Clayton asked. Briggs smirked. They'll scatter. They always do. You don't know them, Clayton said. You don't know me either. Briggs stood and straightened his coat. You'll be forgotten by winter. As he turned to leave, Clayton smiled faintly. Funny, I was just thinking the same about you. That night, the sky over Riverbend Ranch was moonless and black, but in the trees, quiet movement stirred. The tribes hadn't scattered. They had gathered, and they were preparing for the one thing men like Briggs feared more than war: truth. The town of Dry Creek awoke to the sound of hooves. At first, it was just a rumble, faint, distant. But by the time the church bell rang 8, windows were opening, shop doors frozen mid-swing, and townsfolk stood in the street, mouths hanging open. They came from the hills like shadows chasing the sun. Hundreds of native riders, warriors from 5 tribes, painted horses, feathered lances, silent rows of women and elders. No war cries, no banners, just quiet, deliberate presence. At the front rode Toma, wearing a leather vest adorned with white beads. His face was calm, but fire burned in his eyes. Behind him, a rider held high a blanket embroidered with the image of an eagle feather tied to a hat, a symbol. They all now knew. At the jailhouse, Sheriff Merrick burst out of the front door, revolver in hand. Back, he barked. You ain't storming this town. But no one moved. The riders fanned out, surrounding the courthouse and jailhouse in a slow, methodical wave, a show of presence, a reminder that justice didn't belong only to those who wore a badge from the general store. Old Bo Parsons stepped out, jaw slack. Lord Almighty, they came for Reese, inside the cell. Clayton stood and listened. It was like hearing the heartbeat of the land, strong, steady, unbreakable. Then came a softer sound, the cell key rattling in the lock. Bo stood at the door, face pale. I got the spare, he said quietly. Merrick don't run the law alone no more. Clayton stepped out slowly. You sure about this, Bo? The shopkeeper looked around at the sea of mounted warriors. Don't reckon we got a choice outside. Merrick was shouting threats, waving his pistol. But then a single rider dismounted and walked forward. Toma. He walked with purpose, stopping just a few feet from the sheriff. You took an innocent man, he said calmly. You covered for murderers. This ain't your land, Merrick hissed. Toma's eyes didn't waver. Then why do the rivers carry our names? Behind him, Clayton emerged from the jail, walking toward them. His hands were free. His face was covered in dirt and bruises, but he stood tall. You done, Sheriff? Clayton asked. Merrick turned, rage flooding his face. You think this means anything? You think riding in with a parade of feathers changes the law. Clayton stepped closer. You and Briggs twisted the law to serve yourselves, but the land remembers what's right. From the crowd, several townsfolk began stepping forward slowly, nervously. Among them was a young woman who had seen the fire at Clayton's ranch, and a ranch hand who once worked for Briggs. Their voices added to the moment. He didn't start that fight, one said. I saw Briggs pay them riders, said another. They came to run Reese off. Truth was louder than Merrick's gun. The sheriff's hand trembled. His eyes darted from the townsfolk to the tribal riders. Then he dropped his revolver. It hit the dirt with a heavy thud. Toma turned to Clayton. The land stands with you. Clayton looked out at the gathered tribes, the townspeople, and the rising sun over the courthouse. I don't own this land, he said. I just live on it, and I aim to live right. Cheers didn't break out. There were no grand speeches, but a silence came, a sacred kind, as the moment settled into the bones of everyone present. Briggs, he was gone, slipped out the back of town. He would be hunted, by law or by spirit. By noon, the tribes rode back into the hills, not in defeat or retreat, but as protectors who had seen justice done. Toma stayed. He would help rebuild, and so would others. What was once a lonely rancher's land had become a place of unity between past and future, earth and blood. Clayton returned to Riverbend, where the wind moved softer now, and where an eagle feather still danced on his hat. Not as a symbol of debt, but of honor.